Good morning, everyone. Okay, today I'll be talking about women's and gender studies at glance, as you can see in the slide. And here I added some pictures of the theories. This is the way I highlight that this is at glance. We'll be looking at them, but that will be only in general at glance. Because of course there are a lot more theories who are talking about women's and gender studies. Okay, this video will be divided into two. So the first part, which is today's part, will be about the context and the concepts of the women's and gender studies. And then the second part, the following video will cover about some examples of the women's and gender studies, especially in literary works. Okay, so let's move on to the next part. Like I mentioned before, the agenda first that we'll be talking about general terms, and that will be gender and feminism. And then move on to the next part to look at the feminism's waves, and including the terms, the history, and the context. And then for the next video, we'll be looking at the some emerging issues and the examples of the analysis, literary analysis. Okay then. For general terms, we have these two technical terms. First, gender, and the second is feminism. I think for some people, they are still not clear about these two technical terms. I mean, like sometimes people interchange the two technical terms between gender and feminism. So to make it clear, let's take a look at this one by one. First, gender. One of the prominent theories who are talking about gender is Butler. Here, Butler in her Gender Troubles book elaborate that gender is a social construction. It means that gender is flexible, free-floating, and not caused by other stable factors. They explain that gender is something that is constructed in society. So let's take this as the example. A baby is born, and then in our society, and then people will recognize, oh, it's a baby girl, oh, it's a baby boy. Then people try to divide these two, and then if it's a baby girl, then the pink color followed, and if it's the baby boy, and the blue color followed. So this pink and blue, feminine and masculine, which is identified as binary opposition, is identified as gender. So being boy or girl, that's different thing with gender. But being masculine and feminine, being blue or pink, that is social construction. Okay, and then next, Delphi defines as gender precedes sex, and sex itself simply marks a social division because there's a baby boy and baby girl, and then it's a division because in our society, then if it's a man, if it's a boy, then it means something. If it's a girl, then it means something else. So it becomes a social division. Okay, and then next here, Simone de Beauvoir, in the book The Second Sex, divide these two terms clearly. They explain first sex. Sex is used to refer to biological characteristics that distinguish females from males. So here it's talking about anatomical differences. So being females and being males, anatomical differences. We can call it as biological differences. That being a female, it means that you have vagina, and being a male, it means that you have penis. So that's what we refer to as anatomical differences or biological differences. And on the other hand, gender refers to the cultural constructs of femininity and masculinity. Like I mentioned before, it's the binary opposition. There is feminine, there's masculine. And feminine is attributed to female, and masculine usually attributed to male. And the thing here is, gender is not what you are born with, but it's something that socially learned behavior. Like being a girl, it means that this girl learns how to be a woman, learn how to be a female, learn how to be feminine, and the opposite. So the Buddha defines that one is not born but rather becomes a woman. And to be a woman means to be the one expected by others, males, and the term woman is whatever the opposite of man is supposed to be. So if that baby boy is masculine, then it means that the baby girl is feminine. If the baby boy is strong, then it means that the opposite for the baby girl, which is, let's say, the opposite of strong, perhaps weak. All right. And then next. So, uh, what is feminism? We've seen gender, we've seen female, feminist, and then it's feminism. Feminism is a range of social movements, political movements, and ideologies that aim to define and establish the political, economic, and personal society equality of sexes. So here we've got several keywords. We have social movements. So it's not female movements, but social movements, political movements, and ideologies here to see that human beings, male and female, are equal in terms of rights. They have equal rights. That's the point. So it's not to argue, it's not to complain being a female, but to have equal rights. Okay. And then here, Irigaray mentions, history cannot do without existence of two human subjects, man and woman, if it's to get away from master-slave relationships. The thing is, when in society there is social division, female and male, man and woman, then there is a relation between these two. Male dominates women, males dominate females, men dominate women. So power relation that makes it as master and slave relationships, which makes it then not equal. And then Leboeuf in Common Squares mentioned a feminist is a woman who doesn't allow anyone to think in her place. So it's just like being a human being, and then you have the right to think and to do whatever in your own terms. Okay, and Clark's mentioned women are less fixed in the symbolic than men. Women and their language are more fluid, more flowing, and more unstable than men. Woman means both the literal woman and person and the signifiers woman. So here Clark's try to explore that being a woman, it doesn't mean that you're being feminine, but it's more than that, because being a woman is being fluid, that you can be feminine, you can be masculine, and it's not only in the symbol but also in reality, that a woman as the signifier. Okay, and here we have Tori Moy. They explain this clearer. There are several terms to make it clear. Female, a matter of biology, just like what the Buddha mentioned before, is anatomical differences. And then feminine, a set of culturally defined characteristics, the pink one, and the weak one, and things like that. And then being feminist, person who acknowledge the equality of women and men. So we have men and women. If someone says that woman and woman have equal rights, then it means that this someone is a feminist. So it's the way to see that men and women have equal rights. And then feminism, a movement examines the roles of women in society and advocate for women's rights and opportunity. So it's the way of thinking. The question is, are you a feminist? Let's say here me as a woman. If I don't think that men and women supposed to have equal rights, then I'm not a feminist. So being a woman doesn't make you being a feminist. Because there are women who think that, oh, I'm just a woman. I don't deserve it. I need to worship men. I need to obey men. So it doesn't mean that this person, this woman is a feminist. But let's say, on the other hand, you are a man and you think you have a way of thinking that men and women have equal rights, that if a woman deserves to go to higher education, then you are a feminist. So feminist is the way of thinking if you see men and women have equal rights. So are you a feminist? Okay. All right. Now we'll go into more details about feminism. As initiated in the United States, there are three movements: first, second, and third wave, and we'll identify it according to the time period and then principles and issues discussed during that period. Okay. The first wave in the late 19th and early 20th century in the United States and Europe. And the main issues discussed here is abolition of slavery and women's rights. So this is talking about women's rights, especially slavery. Women's Rights Convention held in Seneca Falls in 1920, a 19th Amendment granted women right to vote. If you have ever watched any kind of movies or read history books that talking about in this period the rights of women to vote and including the abolition of slavery. Okay. And the first wave also identified as liberal feminism. What it means, it's a movement socialization, is the origin of gender differences. And the goal here is gender justice. Of course, there are critics go along in this wave, in this movement, some flaws that seem to come from this way of thinking. The first one is the claim that women can become like men if they set their minds to it. And the second one, the claim that most women want to become like men. And the third one, the claim that all women should not become like men to aspire to masculine values. Okay, and the first wave also identified as social Marxist feminism. It means that class and gender intersect. Class accounts for women's status and function in society. And here also discuss about monogamous marriage is about private property, and the family is microcosm of society's larger class relations. So to see how a system works, that it can be seen from the family as the macrocosm of society. Okay, and then here the first wave books. Of course, there are a lot of books that you can read to understand this movement, especially first wave. But here I wrote two as the example, and they are the grand books. First one, A Vindication of Rights of Women by Mary Wollstonecraft, and the second one, A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. Okay, and now let's move on to the second wave. It's in the time period 1960s to 1970s. It's civil rights movement. And here the issues are anti-discrimination policies and equal privileges in education, workplace, and home, and sexuality and reproductive rights, where women then can see and understand their own sexuality and they can have their own reproductive rights. Right then, and for the second wave, also identified as radical feminism, here Male power and privilege are viewed as basis of social relations. And the goal here is abolition of male supremacy. The focus is establishing women-centered beliefs and systems. Okay, and the second wave, also identified as multicultural feminism, it means that this wave focuses on the intersections of race, class, and gender, and the importance of human agency, that human beings as active and creative. It's really interesting because here, women is not only viewed as one, but a woman have different backgrounds. They have different race, class, and even gender. Okay, and the second wave books that you can read to understand this period, The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir, and then The Feminine Mystic by Betty Friedan, Sexual Politics, Subjection of Women, and The Sex Which Is Not One. Okay, and the third wave, the time period is 1990s onward, and this wave discuss about universal womanhood, that women have different race, ethnicity, class, nationality, and religion. Instead of condemning the stereotypes used against them, this wave and the third wave, they exaggerate them. So it's like the celebration of being a woman, that being a woman is different. This individual woman is having different experience with another individual woman. And also another issue, the use of performance, mimicry, and subversion of rhetorical strategies. Okay, the third wave also seen as queer theory, because here sexual identities are viewed as socially constructed and focus on how sexual identity is performed and meanings constructed. So here the celebration, because binary opposition is not seen as the conventional or traditional ones like before, but there are a lot in between, floating between feminine and masculine, like gay, lesbian, and so on. Right, and third wave, also seen as cultural feminism. There are fundamental differences between men and women, and women's differences should be celebrated. There is attempt to recover lost or marginalized women's work and traditions, and create a culture that nurtures and supports women's experiences. That women are different. Each individual woman has specific and unique experience. And then essentialisms, a belief in the real, true sense of things, here including sexuality or gender, is determined by individuals' biology or psychology. Okay, and there are some books for third wave books, uh, like some of them, The Beauty Myth by Naomi Wolf, Gender Trouble, Bodies That Matter, and Gender and Nation. Okay, for the next section, we'll be looking at women's and gender studies in literary works. So before we have seen what is gender, what is feminist, what is feminism, what does it mean being a female, what does it mean being a feminine, and now we'll look at this in women's and gender studies in literary works. So we have um, more specific scope. We are looking at those issues, but in the context of literary works. How to say it? We have that literary works. It could be poem, poetry. It could be movies or films. It could be picture books. It could be any kind of literary works that portray women's and gender issues. So the position is we have literary works, and then there is gender issues and feminist issues. These two issues may work hand in hand. What I'm trying to say, when you talk about gender issues, of course, you are going to talk about feminist issues, and vice versa. When you're talking about feminist issues, somehow you touch the part of the gender issues. That's why I think these two issues work hand in hand, like in a juxtaposition. But then, when you need to analyze and have the focus, you need to decide which one is the focus, whether the focus is the gender issues or the feminist issues. Let's take a look at the examples. Here, I put some examples of the literary works. Um, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, a novel by Maya Angelou, and then Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice, The Story of an Hour by Kat Chopin, and A Little Woman by Louise May Alcott, and Grace for President. So here, these five examples of literary works, we can say that they discuss about feminist issues and somehow gender issues, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a feminine, what it means to be a woman in a society. But now let's take a look at this. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. So here, the main character is a black woman. This is autobiography, so it's Maya Angelou. And another example, The Story of an Hour by Kat Chopin. The main character is a woman, but not a black woman. Of course, these two main characters have different experiences about being a woman because they are from different race, different social class. So, if someone wants to analyze the issue, then you cannot use the same approach. You cannot use the same perspective in analyzing the main character's experience as a woman because the experience of the main character in I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, that is as a black woman and from the working class, absolutely different with the experience of the main character in The Story of an Hour by Kat Chopin. Because she's a woman, but she's not black and she's not from the working class. So what I'm trying to say here is when you read a literary work, then you need to take a look at the context and the uh, text itself, that it has specific and details descriptions of women's experience. In that way, then you need to use the appropriate approach, context, and text to see what the issues, what kind of issues portrayed in the literary work. And then let's see more example. Grace for President. This is a picture book. We can compare, let's say, the main character, the black woman in I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. That will be different with what it means to be a black woman in Grace for President. Being an adult and being a children, being a child. And then this is back then, and this is contemporary context. Then that will be different too. So first, of course, you need to read and then understand the context of the issues, whether it's gender or feminist issues. And after that, you will be able to identify which kind of concept and context and history that you can use to elaborate and explain about the issues portrayed in the literary work. Okay. Uh, we'll see some issues here before we look at some examples of the literary works analysis, like feminism and post-feminism, reconstructing policy. See, it's about politics, and then feminist spaces, that's from architecture approach, and then for feminism, key ideas for business and society. Here, I think what I'm trying to portray that even when we talk about feminism, then it's not only about the technical term that you need to understand and later on elaborate in your analysis, but also what approach. Because if it's only feminism, that one big scope, then you need to find what context the text says, what are the details, what history, what time period, and then what it says, what the issues try to portray. Okay, if it's in literary analysis, we can take a look at this. I divided into two. First, gender role. gender identity, performativity, gender equality, gender-based violence. So this about gender main focus. And the second one, women's struggle, women oppression, women's domestication, women's objectification. See, even between gender and feminist issues, there are different focus. Even though when you are trying to elaborate the women's struggles, perhaps there are some gender roles as well, but you need to focus on the main issues. And some emerging issues like ecofeminism, here to talk about women, the relation between women and nature, and eco-criticism to talk about literature and the physical environment, gender perspective and policy making, gender sensitive design and architecture, and sustainable futures and importance of gender. Okay, and now in a bit we'll be looking at some examples of feminist issues and gender issues in literary analysis. Uh, I think we can have this as the guidance when you want to discuss about feminist or gender issues in literary analysis. You need to keep in mind that don't make it too general. Don't make the term is general. For example, like feminism in uh, Maya Angelou's "I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings." That's too wide. Like I mentioned before, that what kind of feminism that you want to portray. So it needs to be specific. Instead of make it general, you need to make it specific. Feminism in what context and what history. And then abandon previous studies if you do the same research or analysis. Uh, that will be merely repetition. So you better analyze something that has never been discussed yet. And then present a current issue or relevant issues of nowadays situations. Okay, there we go. This is one of the examples. The title is Stereotypical Gender Determined Role Through Rapunzel in the Tangled Movie. Here I can say that if this title is proposed, then I'll approve this. Why? Because stereotypical gender determined role, the issue is clear and specific. So instead of just mention gender issues in Rapunzel Entangled movie, if it's only gender issues, that's too general. Then you can be more specific. What kind of gender issues? Is it gender roles? Is it gender violence? Is it gender relations or anything else? And here it's stereotypical gender determined role. It's specific and the source is specific as well. So for this title is approved. Okay, more example. Female masculinity in the Doll Limbs movie, Raya and the Last Dragon. For this title, let's take a look. You have female. That's the technical term. What does it mean? Female. Are you going to analyze a female in this Raya and the Last Dragon movie? That's even beyond general. And then female, masculinity. What does it mean? So this contradictory. I think this technical term is inappropriate. So instead of using female masculinity, I think here the writer is trying to say that this is about gender attributes, the gender roles, or the performativity. What does it mean to be the main character, which is Raya here? So I think for this title is disapproved. And to make it acceptable, that will be gender performativity. Okay, more example. And then woman objectification in Lost Her Story by Raven Leilani. Woman objectification. I think this is about women's studies. feminist issues. And here it's not only feminist issues mentioning women, but there is objectification. So women's objectification, I think it's clear and specific. So this is acceptable. And the next, gender equality. Wow, this is quite general. Well, there is gender issues, of course, and there's equality. But to make it more appropriate and clear, the writer here can propose what kind of equality. Let's say it's the gender struggle, there will be the gender rules, because the equality itself that will be too wide, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in the family, whether it's in a marriage relation or what. So instead of mentioning gender equality, this title can be proposed to make it, well, I think it's still the same like before, gender performativity. Okay, let's see more example. Gender confusion. This is clear. It's analyzing gender issues, and to be more specific, it's gender confusion. I think this writer somehow will discuss about the gender performativity as well. And then next here, gender inequality, merely the same like gender equality, that's too wide. So what kind of inequality, and then what does the main character do about this to find more specific and detailed gender issues. Okay, and gender-based violence, of course this is clear, but then woman exploitation, that will be different main focus. Let's say here gender-based violence, that's one main focus, and woman exploitation is another main focus. So I think the writer here can decide one as the main focus, that will be gender-based violence, to elaborate what kind of violence happened that related to the gender. Okay, right then. Oh, that's the last one. For questions, I think you can drop it in the chat box down below. Here, I also attach some of the references I use in the slides. Okay, so I have discussed a little bit about the terms, the technical terms, gender and feminism. And we have looked at the history and the context, some books that you can read to understand each wave. And we have seen some emerging issues. And by the end, we have seen some examples of the titles in literary analysis that discussing women's and gender issues. I hope this video helpful and you can take away some insightful information from the slides. So thank you.